The music swelled. A wave of violin and cello that washed over the velvet seats and gilded balconies of the concert hall. It was a beautiful sound, full of hope and resolution. I closed my eyes, letting it fill the spaces inside me, the ones I had worked so hard to reclaim. A woman next to me, a new friend from the Historical Society, patted my hand gently. "Isn't it divine, Eleanor?" she whispered. I smiled. A genuine, easy smile. "It truly is," I replied. My life was full of moments like this now. Quiet joy, shared beauty, and a profound sense of peace. My gaze drifted across the room, to a small table where silent auction items were displayed. There were paintings, bottles of expensive wine, and a beautifully wrapped gift box, tied with a silver ribbon. For a second, my breath caught in my throat. The smile on my face didn't falter. But deep inside, a memory stirred. It's funny what the mind chooses to hold on to. After everything, after all the years, it wasn't the grand declarations or the bitter arguments that surfaced first. It was a box. A simple, empty box. And the silence that came with it. That memory was the ghost that started it all. The catalyst for the life I was living now. Before this piece, before the music and the freedom, there was my 68th birthday. And it began, as it so often did, with a phone call I had been waiting for all day. The phone rang at precisely 4:15 p.m. Just as I was pruning the last of the deadheads from the rose bushes my late husband, Richard, had planted. His roses. They were the one thing in my life that still bloomed with predictable loyalty. I wiped my soil-stained hands on my apron, my heart giving a familiar, hopeful flutter. "Hello? Hey, Mom. Mark." His voice was distracted, the sound of traffic bleeding through the line. He was always in his car, always on his way to somewhere more important. "Mark, darling, how are you?" I tried to keep my voice light, to not betray the fact that I had been looking at the silent phone for hours. "Busy. Mom, listen, about your birthday tomorrow. We're still on for dinner at our place, right? 6 o'clock. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation of an obligation. "Of course, dear. I'm looking forward to it." I was. I truly was. Every year, I held on to the hope that this time would be different. This time, they would see me. "Great. Tiffany's making her special lasagna. The kids are. Well, they're excited to see you." The lie was so thin it was transparent. I could practically hear his wife, Tiffany, in the background, mouthing the words for him. In the 17 years they'd been married, Tiffany had perfected the art of polite indifference. She treated me like a piece of old furniture they were obligated to dust off for holidays. "And how are Aiden and Chloe?" I asked, picturing my grandchildren. Aiden, 16, was a fortress of teenage silence. Chloe, 14, communicated mostly through eye rolls. "They're good. You know, school, sports, the usual." The impatience in his voice was a physical thing, a pressure building on the other end of the line. "Okay, Mom, I've got to run. See you tomorrow. Love you." The "love you" was an afterthought, a period at the end of a sentence he was desperate to finish. "I love you too, sweetheart," I said to the dead air. I placed the phone back in its cradle and looked around my house. It was a classic Portland Craftsman, filled with dark wood, built-in bookshelves, and 35 years of memories. Richard and I had bought it when Mark was just a boy. Every scuff on the hardwood floor told a story. Every book on the shelves had been read and loved. To me, it was a sanctuary, a living album of our life together. To Mark and Tiffany, it was dated. They lived in a sprawling, modern house in the suburbs with gray walls, recessed lighting, and a distinct lack of soul. They called it clean. I called it a waiting room. Richard had been gone for 5 years. He was a quiet, brilliant man, An investor who saw value where others didn't. He had been my anchor, my partner in all things. When he passed, he left me not just with a broken heart, but with a secret. This is for you, Ellie. He told me in his final weeks, his voice a frail whisper. He had tapped a thick leather-bound folder on his bedside table. This is for your peace of mind. Not for Mark. Not for anyone else. It's your security. Your freedom. I knew what was in that folder. I had sat with our lawyer, Mr. Harrison, and gone through it page by page. Stocks in tech companies Richard had believed in decades ago. Deeds to properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods. The papers for a small, charming beach house on the coast. And documentation for his art and coin collections, which were apparently worth a small fortune. I was, on paper, a multimillionaire. But my life didn't reflect that. I lived on my modest pension and Richard's social security. I drove a 10-year-old car. I wore clothes from the department store, always bought on sale. It wasn't an act. It was just how I'd always lived. Richard and I never felt the need to display our wealth. We found richness in books, in travel, in our garden, in each other. Mark and Tiffany, however, operated on a different frequency. Their lives were a performance. The right car, the right neighborhood, the right designer labels on their clothes. They were drowning in debt to maintain an image, all while assuming a massive inheritance was waiting for them just over the horizon. They saw their poor, lonely mother, and felt a mixture of pity and impatience. They had no idea that their poor, lonely mother could have bought and sold their entire subdivision without even noticing the expense. I never corrected their assumption. Thought, naively, that they loved me for me. I thought that keeping things simple would keep our relationship pure. I was a fool. The next evening, I drove to their house with a small, homemade apple pie on the passenger seat. It was my specialty. The crust made with lard. Just the way Mark used to love it as a boy. I arrived at 6 on the dot. Tiffany opened the door. A strained smile plastered on her face. Eleanor, you're here. She was dressed in a beige cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my entire monthly budget. She took the pie from me with 2 perfectly manicured hands. Oh, another pie. How traditional. She said the word traditional as if it were a mild disease. The house was, as always, immaculate and cold. Aiden and Chloe were slouched on a vast white sofa, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of their phones. Say hello to your grandmother, Mark said, walking in from the kitchen, not looking up from his own phone. Hey, Grandma, they mumbled in unison, their thumbs never ceasing their frantic tapping. It's so good to see you both, I said, my voice sounding unnaturally cheerful in the sterile silence of the room. I wanted to ask about school, about their friends, but I knew I would only receive one-word answers. The gulf between us felt wider each time I saw them. Dinner was a tense affair. Mark talked about a deal he was trying to close. Tiffany complained about the contractor who was redoing their master bathroom. I tried to share a story about a funny thing that happened at the library, but their eyes glazed over before I even got to the punchline. They just waited for me to finish so the real conversation could resume. I was a commercial break in the feature film of their lives. Finally, after the lasagna had been eaten and the plates cleared, Tiffany clapped her hands together with forced excitement. Time for presents. Chloe slouched over and handed me a single, brightly wrapped box. It was a large box, beautifully done up in gold paper with an elaborate blue bow. For a moment, my foolish heart did that hopeful little flutter again. It was so big. Maybe they had pooled their money and bought me that new tablet I'd mentioned wanting. Something to make video calls easier. Go on, Mom. Open it, Mark said, leaning back in his chair with a self-satisfied smirk. I carefully undid the ribbon and slid my finger under the paper. The box was surprisingly light. I lifted the lid, and I stared. Inside, There was nothing. Just white tissue paper pushed to the sides, revealing the empty cardboard bottom. It was a void. A perfectly wrapped, beautifully presented void. I looked up, confused. My mind couldn't process it. I don't understand. Tiffany let out a short, brittle laugh. It's a conceptual gift, Eleanor. A joke. For the woman who has everything she needs. Mark chuckled along with her. Minimalist. Mom. It's very chic. I just sat there, holding the empty box in my lap. The weight of it, the nothingness, was heavier than anything I had ever held. My pie sat on the counter, uncut. The kids were already back on their phones. My family was smiling at me, waiting for me to laugh at their cruel, clever joke. The silence in my head was deafening. My son thought my life, my heart, my existence, was empty. My breath hitched. I needed to leave. I needed air. I excused myself to the restroom, my movements stiff and robotic. The guest bathroom was, like the rest of the house, pristine and impersonal. I splashed cold water on my face, but it couldn't wash away the sting. As I stood by the door, gathering the strength to go back out there and pretend, I heard their voices from the dining room, low and clear. It was Mark, speaking to Tiffany. The door was slightly ajar, and his words slid through the crack like a knife. See? I told you she wouldn't get it, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. It was a little mean, Mark, Tiffany replied, though there was no real conviction in her tone. Then came the words that shattered the last remaining fragments of my heart. The words that would echo in my mind for months. It was Mark's voice. Casual. Throwaway whisper full of smug certainty. It's perfect, he said. An empty box for an empty woman. An empty box for an empty woman. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The blood drained from my face, and a cold, terrifying clarity washed over me. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a judgment. It was how my only son, the boy I had raised and loved with every fiber of my being, truly saw me. I was nothing to him. A hollow shell. A placeholder. An empty box. In that moment, standing in that cold, sterile bathroom, something inside me didn't just break. It hardened. The soft, hopeful part of my heart that had been waiting for their love turned to ice. The grief was immense. A tidal wave that threatened to pull me under. But beneath the grief, something else was born. Quiet, unshakable resolve. He was wrong. I was not empty. My life was full of love and memory and a secret strength he couldn't possibly comprehend. They thought I was an empty box. Fine. Then I would show them what it truly meant to be left with nothing at all. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I simply straightened my spine, tucked that cold, hard realization deep inside me, and composed my face into a mask of polite neutrality. I walked out of the bathroom and back into the dining room. The three of them, Mark, Tiffany, and the empty box on the table, looked up. For a split second, I didn't see my son or his family. I saw three strangers in expensive clothes, sitting in a house that felt like a museum of bad taste. They were aliens, speaking a language of materialism and casual cruelty that I no longer had any desire to understand. Is everything all right, Mom? Mark asked, a flicker of something annoyance, concern, in his eyes. I gave him a small, distant smile. I have a bit of a headache. Suddenly, I think I should head home. Oh, already? Tiffany said, her relief barely veiled. Well, if you're not feeling well, you didn't even have any pie. She gestured toward the counter, where my offering sat untouched and ignored. I seem to have lost my appetite, I said, my voice even in calm. It was a stranger's voice, devoid of the warmth I had always forced into it for their benefit. I walked to the front door, not waiting for them to get up. I didn't want their false gestures of affection, their hands on my arm guiding me out. I was perfectly capable of leaving on my own. "We'll call you tomorrow, Mom," Mark called from the dining room. "Don't trouble yourselves," I said without turning around. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. As I pulled the door shut behind me, the finality of the click echoed in the hollow space that had just been carved into my chest. I had the empty gift box in my hands. I hadn't even realized I'd picked it up. Felt right. Somehow. A souvenir from the end of an era. The drive home was a blur. The familiar streets of Portland, the glow of streetlights, the distant silhouette of the West Hills, none of it registered. I was on autopilot, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The empty box sat on the passenger seat beside me. Silent, mocking companion. An empty box for an empty woman. The phrase played on a loop in my mind, each repetition chipping away another piece of the woman I used to be. The mother who made excuses for her son's thoughtlessness. The mother-in-law who bit her tongue at her daughter-in-law's condescension. The grandmother who pretended not to notice her grandchildren's complete and utter disinterest. That woman died tonight. She died in a cold, white bathroom, listening to the truth she had spent years denying. When I got home, the house felt different. My sanctuary. It had always been a place of comfort. Its walls saturated with Richard's presence, with our shared laughter. Tonight, it felt cavernous and silent. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. I walked through the rooms, running my hand along the spines of Richard's books, tracing the outline of his favorite armchair. For 5 years, I had been living in a museum of my own, a museum dedicated to a life, a love, a family that I now understood only existed in my own mind. I sat down at the heavy oak desk in Richard's study, the empty box placed squarely in the center of the leather blotter. And for the first time that night, I let myself break. The tears weren't loud or hysterical. They were silent, hot tears that streamed down my face, dripping onto the glossy gold wrapping paper. I cried for the little boy who used to hold my hand and tell me I was the best mom in the world. I cried for the young man I had been so proud of at his college graduation. I cried for the loss of a relationship that I had nurtured with my whole heart, only to find out it was a barren garden. I was mourning a son who was still alive. It was a special kind of hell. I cried until there was nothing left but a raw, hollow ache. And in that aching silence, Richard's voice came to me, as clear as if he were sitting in the chair across from me. "This is for your freedom, Ellie." My gaze fell upon the bottom drawer of his desk. I opened it. Inside, just as he had left it, was the thick, leather-bound folder. My hands trembled as I lifted it out and placed it on the desk next to the empty box. The contrast was stark. One represented a life of emptiness and lies. The other, a life of substance, of love, and of carefully planned security. My security, my freedom. I opened the folder. The neat columns of stocks, the deeds to properties, the appraisals for the art and the coins. It was an arsenal. Richard hadn't just left me money. He had left me power. The power to live my life entirely on my own terms. The power to be beholden to no one. For 5 years, I had ignored that power, letting this folder sit in a drawer like a dormant volcano. I had been so focused on trying to win the love of my son, I had forgotten to love myself. I had been so afraid of being alone that I had accepted being lonely in their company. No more. The new resolve that had been born in that bathroom now had a blueprint. Mark and Tiffany saw me as an obstacle, an old woman sitting on their future fortune. They were waiting for me to die so their real lives could begin. They had no idea that their entire performance of success, the big house, the fancy cars, the private schools, was a house of cards built on a mountain of debt, propped up by the assumption of my death and their inheritance. They felt entitled to Richard's life's work, to our life's work, without ever showing an ounce of respect for the woman who was its guardian. An empty box for an empty woman. A cold smile touched my lips. Felt foreign on my face. It was the smile of a stranger, but a stranger I was starting to like. I picked up the phone. It was late, nearly 10 o'clock, but I knew he would answer. I dialed the number from memory. It rang twice. Harrison. His voice was professional, even at this hour. Mr. Harrison. It's Eleanor Vance. Eleanor. Is everything all right? It's late for you to be calling. I could hear the immediate concern in his voice. Arthur Harrison had been Richard's lawyer and friend for 40 years. He was a kind, decent man who treated me with more respect in a 5-minute phone call than my son had in 5 years. I'm fine, Arthur. In fact, I think I'm better than I've been in a very long time. My voice was steady. The tremble was gone. I need to schedule a meeting with you. As soon as possible. Tomorrow. If you have the time. Of course. I can clear my morning. 10 o'clock? Perfect. I said. I'm making some changes. Some significant changes to my estate. There was a slight pause. Eleanor. Is this about Mark? Arthur was shrewd. He had seen the dynamic for years, though he was too professional to ever comment on it directly. I took a deep breath. This is about me. Arthur. It's about honoring Richard's last wishes. He told me he was leaving me my freedom. I've decided it's time I started living like it. I explained what had happened. I told him about the dinner, the children on their phones, the cold lasagna, and then I told him about the gift, about the empty box. I told him the words I had overheard. As I spoke, the pain began to transform, crystallizing into something hard and clear purpose. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I worried I had shocked him, that he would think I was being rash or vengeful. Then he spoke, and his voice was filled with a quiet, righteous anger. That boy, he said. The formality gone. That foolish, ungrateful boy. Richard would be profoundly disappointed. He sighed. Eleanor, I am so sorry. No one deserves that. Least of all you. He paused again. Whatever you want to do, I will make it happen. You have my full support. Richard wanted you to be happy. Truly happy. A single tear, the last one, slid down my cheek. But this one wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of gratitude. I wasn't alone in this. Thank you, Arthur. I'll see you at 10. I hung up the phone and looked at the two objects on the desk. The leather folder, heavy with my future, and the empty box, light as a feather. They thought my life was empty. They had no idea. But they were about to find out. They had given me the perfect metaphor for their inheritance. An empty box. And I was going to spend the next few weeks filling it. Not with gifts or money, but with the dust and ashes of the future they thought they owned. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. For the first time in 5 years, the silence in the house didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a clean slate. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and watched the gray light of a Portland dawn slowly illuminate the leaves in my garden. The pain from the night before was still there. A low, constant hum beneath the surface. But it was no longer in control. It was fuel. I showered and dressed with intention. I chose a tailored wool dress I hadn't worn in years and a pair of sensible, elegant heels. I did my hair. Applied a touch of lipstick. Looking in the mirror, I saw not the poor, lonely mother from my son's imagination, but a woman of substance. Eleanor Vance, the wife of Richard Vance, the steward of his legacy, the master of her own fate. My 10 o'clock meeting with Arthur Harrison was transformative. His office, in a historic downtown building, was the antithesis of my son's world. It was filled with old books, polished wood, and the quiet dignity of a long and respected career. Arthur greeted me with a warm handshake and a cup of hot tea. You look well, Eleanor. he said, his eyes kind, determined. I am, Arthur, I replied, taking a seat across from his large desk. I've been passive for too long. I've been waiting for a fantasy to come true. Now, I'm dealing with reality. We spent the next 2 hours poring over the leather-bound folder. Arthur laid out the full scope of my assets with a clarity I hadn't fully appreciated before. We weren't just talking about money in a bank account. We were talking about tangible things. Things that Mark and Tiffany knew about and lusted after. There was the house I lived in. This beautiful craftsman in a highly desirable neighborhood. Fully paid off and worth a fortune in Portland's booming real estate market. They had often joked about how much it would be worth when they sold it. There was the beach house on the Oregon coast. A charming little cottage with an ocean view that Richard and I had bought decades ago. It was where we took Mark every summer when he was a boy. He hadn't visited in over a decade, but I knew he considered it his. He'd once mentioned to a friend, in my hearing, that he was looking forward to gutting it and turning it into a modern rental property. And then there were the collections. Richard's art collection wasn't just a few nice paintings. It included works from several prominent Pacific Northwest artists. His coin collection was a lifetime's passion, meticulously cataloged and appraised. I knew Tiffany had her eye on a particular landscape painting for the wall of their sterile living room. And Mark often talked about how the coins would be a nice nest egg for the kids' college funds. They saw these things not as parts of my life, but as items on their future inventory list. So, Arthur said, leaning back in his chair, "What is your plan? Eleanor? What do you want to do with all of this?" I took a deep breath. The idea had been forming since I'd hung up the phone with him the night before. Now, I said it out loud for the first time. I want to liquidate it. I said. All of it. Arthur's eyebrows shot up. All of it? The house? The beach cottage? The collections? Everything. I confirmed. My voice steady. I want to sell the properties. I want to consign the art and the coins to an auction house. I want to turn every last physical asset they are expecting into cash. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. That's a monumental task, Eleanor. And once it's done, you won't have your home. You won't have the cottage. A house is not a home, Arthur. Not anymore. My home was with Richard. This is just a building full of ghosts. And the cottage, the memories I have there are mine. I don't need the building to keep them. It's better they go to a family who will actually use it, who will build their own memories there. A slow smile spread across Arthur's face. He understood completely. This wasn't about self-destruction. This was about liberation. And once it's all liquidated, he asked, what then? Where will the money go? We're going to set up a charitable trust, I said, feeling a surge of excitement. The Richard and Eleanor Vance Foundation. It will support the things we always cared about. Literacy programs for underprivileged children. The local symphony orchestra. Animal shelters. I paused, then added, and a significant portion will go to establishing grants for single mothers and widows over 60, to help them achieve financial independence and security. Arthur's smile widened. That is a truly magnificent plan, Eleanor. It's a legacy Richard would be immensely proud of. There's one more thing, I said, leaning forward. I want to revise my will. The new will is to be very simple. It will state that the entirety of my estate, upon my death, will be transferred to the foundation. And Mark? Arthur asked gently. I looked him straight in the eye. Mark will receive a one-time, final inheritance, to be delivered upon my death. It will be exactly what he gave me for my birthday. Arthur looked puzzled for a second, and then his eyes widened in comprehension. The empty box. The empty box, I confirmed, with a certified copy of the final will inside it. He let out a low whistle. a mixture of shock and admiration. Eleanor Vance, you are a woman of hidden depths. My son thinks I'm an empty woman, I said, my voice devoid of self-pity. It seems only fair that his inheritance should reflect his opinion of me. Over the next few weeks, Arthur and I set my plan into motion with the precision of a military campaign. He was a master of his craft. He brought in the best real estate agent in the city, a discreet and efficient woman named Ms. Albright. She came to the house, her eyes assessing its value with a professional gleam, but she spoke to me with kindness and respect. She understood my desire for a quiet, private sale. We can list it privately to pre-qualified buyers, she suggested. Avoid the hassle of open houses. A house like this, in this location, it will sell itself. We did the same for the beach house. Arthur contacted a specialty auction house in Seattle to handle the art in coins. Experts arrive. Men in quiet suits who handled Richard's beloved paintings and trays of coins with reverent white gloves. They spoke of provenance and auction estimates in hushed, respectful tones. During this entire period, I maintained a strict silence with my son's family. The day after my birthday, Mark had called, his voice laced with the grudging sense of familial duty. Hey, Mom. Just checking in. You feeling better? I'm perfectly fine, Mark. Thank you for asking, I said, my tone polite but cool. Good. Good. So, that gift. It was just a joke. You know. Tiffany felt a little bad. Thought maybe it was too much. Not at all, I said smoothly. It was very illuminating. In fact, I've been thinking a lot about it. It was a very powerful statement. Oh, well, good, he said, clearly relieved to be let off the hook. He had no capacity for introspection, no ability to see past the surface of things. He heard that I wasn't angry and assumed everything was fine. He never asked what I meant by illuminating, or a powerful statement. He didn't care. The calls became less frequent. A text here and there. Hope you're doing okay, Mom. I would reply with a simple, all is well. They were content to leave me to my empty life, secure in the knowledge that they had performed their duty and could now get back to their own important lives, waiting for the inevitable day when their ship would come in. They had no idea I was systematically dismantling the ship, selling it for parts, and using the proceeds to build a fleet of lifeboats for others. The most difficult part was the physical act of emptying the house. 35 years of life had to be sorted, packed, or discarded. Every object held a memory. The chipped coffee mug Richard used every morning. The stack of Mark's childhood drawings I had carefully preserved. For a moment, holding a picture of a 5-year-old Mark proudly presenting me with a dandelion, my resolve wavered. A pang of immense sadness shot through me. This was the boy I missed. Where had he gone? I allowed myself that moment of grief. I acknowledged the pain. Then I gently placed the drawing into a box labeled Memories. I could keep the memory of that little boy. I didn't have to keep sacrificing my self-respect for the man he had become. I hired an estate sale company to handle the furniture and household goods. The rest the truly personal items. The photo albums. Richard's letters. My favorite books I packed into a small number of boxes, destined for whatever new, smaller life I would build for myself. One afternoon, as the estate sale team was tagging furniture, my neighbor from across the street, Mrs. Gable, knocked on the door. Eleanor? She said, her brow furrowed with concern. I saw the estate sale sign. Is everything? Are you all right? I smiled at her. A real smile. I'm more than all right, Martha. I'm starting a new chapter. But, you're selling the house? Her voice was filled with disbelief. You love this house. I loved the life I had in this house. I corrected her gently. The house is just wood and nails. It's time for a new family to have it. I'm downsizing. simplifying my life. The narrative was simple and plausible. The grieving widow, finally ready to move on from her large, empty house. No one would question it. Certainly not Mark and Tiffany. If they heard about it, they would probably be thrilled. Assuming I was moving into a sensible condo, and that the proceeds from the house sale would just be added to their future inheritance pot. The thought made my secret smile return. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. The house sold quickly, for a price that made even Ms. Albright's eyes widen. The beach cottage was snapped up by a young family from Seattle. The auction for the art and coins was a resounding success. Arthur would call me with updates, his voice filled with a kind of quiet glee. The numbers were staggering. The Richard and Eleanor Vance Foundation was no longer just an idea. It was becoming a financial powerhouse. Finally, the day came. All the contracts were signed. The money was securely in the trust's accounts. The will was rewritten, signed, and notarized. My work was done. All that was left was the final performance. I picked up the phone and dialed Mark's number. "Mom? I was just about to call you." He lied. "How lovely," I said. My voice warmed for the first time in months. I had to set the stage. "Mark, darling, I know we've been a bit distant lately, and I've been doing a lot of thinking. I feel badly about how things were left after my birthday. I'd like to have you all over for a special dinner. My treat. To clear the air and make an announcement." I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Make an announcement. The words were bait, and I knew he would take it. "An announcement?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp with interest. "Yes. Something important about the future. For all of us," I said, letting the implication hang in the air. "Let's go somewhere special. The Chart House. Next Saturday night? At 7. The Chart House was one of the most expensive and exclusive restaurants in Portland, famous for its panoramic views of the city. It was a place Tiffany had always wanted to go. It was a statement. The Chart House? Mark sounded stunned. "Wow. Mom." "Yes. Of course. We'll be there. Is everything okay?" "Everything," I said, a genuine smile in my voice, "is perfect." The trap was set. The week leading up to the dinner was a strange sort of limbo. I was living in a small, furnished apartment I'd rented, a temporary space that felt anonymous and freeing. My few boxes of personal treasures were stacked neatly in a corner, waiting for me to decide where my new home would be. The grand craftsman house on the hill was no longer mine. It had been scrubbed clean of my existence, ready for its new owners. The feeling was not one of loss, but of lightness. I had shed a heavy skin. Mark called twice during that week, a record for him. His tone was entirely different. It was solicitous, almost warm. He was a fisherman who thought he had a prize fish on the line, and he was carefully, cautiously reeling it in. "Just wanted to make sure you were still feeling up for Saturday, Mom," he said in one call. "You don't have to do this if it's too much trouble." "Not at all, dear," I replied, playing my part. "I'm looking forward to it. It's important." "So, this announcement," he probed, trying to sound casual. "Is it good news?" "I believe so," I said, and it wasn't a lie. It was wonderful news, just not for him. It's about securing the family's future, making sure everyone is taken care of, the way your father would have wanted. That was the magic phrase. The way your father would have wanted. To Mark, that meant only one thing, the transfer of wealth. He must have hung up the phone and immediately told Tiffany. I could picture her excitement, the planning of her outfit, the triumphant look she'd be practicing in the mirror. They would think my illuminating birthday experience had been a wake-up call. They'd assume their tough love had worked, that I had finally realized my mortality and was ready to do the sensible thing, hand over control of the assets to them. Their arrogance was my greatest ally. On Saturday night, I arrived at the chart house a few minutes early. I had chosen my outfit as carefully as a general choosing his uniform for a treaty signing. I wore a simple but exquisitely cut black dress. A single strand of pearls Richard had given me for our 25th anniversary, one of the few pieces of jewelry I had kept in a red coat. Red, the color of power. I was seated at a prime table, one with a breathtaking, glittering view of the city lights and the Willamette River. I ordered a glass of champagne. When the waiter brought it, I held it up to the light, watching the bubbles rise. I felt a profound sense of calm. There was no anger left, no bitterness, just a quiet, surgical certainty. I was not there for revenge. I was there to deliver a consequence. They arrived precisely at 7. A flurry of self-importance. Mark wore a suit that was a size too tight, trying too hard to look like the executive he aspired to be. Tiffany was in a slinky silver dress that shimmered under the restaurant's low lighting. She scanned the room as she walked, assessing the other patrons, making sure this was a place worthy of her presence. The children, Aiden and Chloe, were dragged along, looking bored and out of place in their fancy clothes, their faces already itching to return to the glow of their screens. "Mom, you're here," Mark boomed, leaning down to give me an awkward, stilted hug. It was a performance for the other diners. See what a good son I am, taking my elderly mother to a fancy dinner. "Eleanor, this place is fabulous," Tiffany gushed, her eyes wide. "You really shouldn't have." It was a lie. She thought I absolutely should have. "Hello, darlings," I said, my smile serene. "Please, sit down." They slid into their seats, my grandchildren immediately pulling out their phones. This time, I didn't say a word about it. It no longer mattered. "So," Mark said, rubbing his hands together after the waiter had taken their drink orders. "This is great. Really great. It's good to see you looking so vibrant, Mom." "I feel vibrant, Mark," I said truthfully. "I've been making a lot of changes lately, simplifying things." Tiffany leaned forward, her expression a careful mask of sympathy. "We heard from a neighbor that you're selling the house. We were going to call you. We were so worried. Are you moving into a condo? We can help you find one. You know, something modern and easy to manage." The offer was transparent. They wanted me in a small, cheap box, maximizing the cash from the house sale. "Thank you for the offer, Tiffany, but that won't be necessary. My living situation is already taken care of," I said smoothly. I gestured to the waiter. "Shall we order? I recommend the sea base." The meal was the pinnacle of their hypocrisy. They were attentive, engaged. They asked me questions and pretended to listen to the answers. Mark told a charming story about a memory from the beach house. Tiffany complimented my pearls. They were laying it on so thick it was almost comical. They were acting like the loving family I had always dreamed of. But they were doing it for an audience of one, me, the gatekeeper to their fortune. They weren't trying to love me. They were trying to unlock me. Aiden and Chloe ate their expensive food in sullen silence, occasionally looking up when their parents shot them a warning glance. They were props in their parents' play, and they knew it. Finally, after the dessert plates were cleared away, the moment arrived. The coffee had been poured. The city lights twinkled below us like a blanket of fallen stars. It was a perfect, cinematic setting for a climax. Mark cleared his throat, placing his hands on the table. "So, Mom, you said you had an announcement. We're all here. We're all ears." His smile was wide, expectant. He looked like a man about to be told he'd won the lottery. Tiffany sat beside him, her posture perfect, her face alight with anticipation. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. I put the cup down gently, making a soft clinking sound on the saucer. I looked at each of them in turn. my gaze lingering for a moment on my son. I saw not the man in the tight suit, but the little boy with the dandelion, and for a fleeting instant, my heart ached. Then I looked at Tiffany's greedy, expectant face, and the ache vanished, replaced by resolve. Yes, I began, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the restaurant's low hum. I do have an announcement. As I mentioned, I've been doing a lot of thinking since my birthday. That gift you gave me, the empty box, it was truly profound. It made me realize I needed to divest myself of unnecessary attachments. To unburden myself. Mark nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Mom. That's a healthy way to look at it. Downsizing. It's smart. I'm so glad you agree, I said, my smile never wavering. Because that's exactly what I've done. As Tiffany mentioned, I sold the house. It was a wonderful sale. A lovely family with 3 young children bought it. I know they'll be very happy there. That's great, Mom, Mark said, leaning in. So the proceeds. I held up a hand to stop him. I also sold the beach house. I continued, my voice level. A nice young couple from Seattle bought it. They plan to spend every summer there with their children. They reminded me so much of Richard and me when we first bought it. Mark's smile tightened slightly. He was getting impatient for the bottom line. Okay. And then there were the collections. I went on, ticking the items off an invisible list. Your father's art. His coins. They were just gathering dust. It seemed selfish to keep them hidden away. So, I consigned them to a wonderful auction house. The auction was last month. It was a tremendous success. Collectors from all over the world participated. The prices they fetched were astronomical. Now they were both staring at me, their masks beginning to crack. This wasn't going according to their script. I was talking about everything in the past tense. Mom, what are you saying? Mark asked, his voice losing its confident boom. I finally leaned forward, my smile gone, replaced by a look of serene, absolute finality. I was no longer the soft, accommodating mother. I was a stranger delivering a verdict. I'm saying that my unburdening is complete. The house is gone. The cottage is gone. The art and the coins are gone. Every significant, tangible asset that your father and I built over a lifetime has been converted into cash. Tiffany's face had gone pale. Cash? What? What did you do with the cash? Eleanor? The question was a breathless whisper. This was the moment. The crescendo. The reason we were all sitting here. In this beautiful restaurant. Surrounded by the illusion of wealth and happiness. I'm so glad you asked. Tiffany. I said. My voice as cold and clear as the ice in their water glasses. I used it to create something new. Something meaningful. I have established the Richard and Eleanor Vance Foundation. I paused to let the words sink in. Mark just stared. His mouth slightly agape. The color draining from his face. It's a charitable trust. I explained calmly. Its purpose will be to fund literacy programs, the arts, and animal welfare here in Portland. It will also provide financial assistance grants to women like me, who find themselves alone later in life and need a chance to rebuild their independence and their dignity. I looked directly at Mark. All the proceeds, every last penny from the sales, has been placed irrevocably into this foundation. It's my legacy. It's your father's legacy. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier and more profound than the silence after I had opened the empty box. In that silence, I saw the full, unvarnished truth on their faces. I saw the collapse of a lifetime of entitlement. The dream of unearned wealth evaporated before my very eyes, leaving behind only the ugly, naked greed that had been fueling it all along. Chloe and Aiden had finally looked up from their phones, their teenage apathy pierced by the raw tension radiating from their parents. They didn't understand the details, but they understood disaster when they saw it. It was Tiffany who broke the silence. Her voice was a strangled, disbelieving squeak. All of it? You gave away. All of it. Our money. It was never your money, Tiffany, I said, my voice quiet but firm. It was my money. And Richard's. And we chose to do with it what we saw fit. Mark finally found his voice. It was hoarse, full of a dawning horror. No. You can't have. The house. My inheritance. Your inheritance, I said, looking him dead in the eye, is exactly what you decided I was worth. Do you remember my birthday? Mark, you gave me an empty box. And you called me an empty woman. You thought my life, my value, was nothing. So I have adjusted my affairs to reflect that. The new will is very clear. Everything I have left goes to the foundation. Your inheritance will be nothing. A truly empty box. The aftermath of my announcement was not a fiery explosion, but a slow, suffocating implosion. Mark's face went from shock to a pasty, sickly white. The facade of the successful son, the master of his universe, crumbled into dust, revealing the terrified, entitled manchild underneath. He looked at me as if he'd never seen me before. And in a way, he hadn't. He had only ever seen a reflection of his own expectations. You're joking, he stammered, shaking his head in disbelief. This is a joke. It's like the box. A conceptual joke, right? Mom, this is some kind of twisted lesson? His voice held a desperate, pleading note. He was begging me to tell him it wasn't real. That his future hadn't just been vaporized between the sea base and the cheesecake. Does this feel like a joke, Mark? I asked, my voice holding no malice, only a profound, unshakable seriousness. The foundation is real. The sales are real. The new will is real. Mr. Harrison has managed the entire process. It is all legal, final, and irrevocable. Tiffany made a sound, a choked gasp that was half sob, half shriek. How could you? She hissed, her manicured hands gripping the edge of the white tablecloth. Her carefully constructed mask of elegance had melted away, revealing a face contorted with pure, undiluted rage. How could you be so selfish? So cruel? After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me? The question hung in the air between us. I thought of the perfunctory phone calls, the tolerated holiday visits, the years of being treated as a burdensome afterthought, the empty box. What exactly have you done for me, Tiffany, other than wait for me to die? Her face flushed a blotchy, ugly red. She was speechless, because she had no answer. There was nothing to say. My quiet accusation was the absolute truth, and they knew it. Mark, however, found his voice again, and it was filled with the rage of a thwarted child. This was Dad's money. He would never have wanted this. He would have wanted it to go to his family, to his grandchildren. He gestured wildly toward Aiden and Chloe, who were now staring at the scene unfolding, their phones completely forgotten. They were finally present, just in time for the detonation. You're right about one thing, I said calmly. Your father would not have wanted this. He would have wanted a son who loved and respected his mother. He would have wanted a family that valued connection over currency. He would have wanted his grandchildren to know their grandmother's name, not just the balance of her bank account. You are the one who failed to live up to his wishes, Mark, not me. Continued, my voice measured and deliberate. Richard left me that money for my freedom and my security. For years, I didn't use it. I kept living my quiet life, hoping for a love that you were incapable of giving. I was willing to let you have it all. Eventually, all I ever wanted in return was a little kindness, a little respect. Was that really so much to ask? I looked at him, my heart aching with the ghost of a love that was now dead. But you couldn't even manage that. You and your wife. You stood in your cold, empty house and you dismissed my entire life. You summed me up in a single, cruel phrase. An empty box for an empty woman. You passed your judgment on me. Mark. I said, gesturing around the opulent restaurant. At their shocked faces. This is not my judgment on you. This is simply the consequence of yours. He flinched as if I'd struck him. The words, his own words, thrown back at him in this public place, had finally hit their mark. I didn't mean it like that. He mumbled, his eyes darting around, suddenly aware of the nearby tables, of the waiters who were pointedly looking away. Didn't you? I asked. It felt very clear to me, and it clarified everything. You don't see value in me, so you will receive nothing of value from me. It's perfectly symmetrical, don't you think? Tiffany pushed her chair back violently, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. I can't listen to this. She grabbed her purse. We're leaving. She looked at Mark, her eyes blazing. Are you coming? Mark was frozen, his gaze locked on me. He looked broken. For a second, a flicker of the old maternal instinct rose in me, the desire to comfort him, to fix this. But I pushed it down. Fixing this would mean destroying myself, going back to being the woman who accepted their scraps of affection. I would not do that. Not ever again. Mark. Tiffany snapped, her voice sharp as glass. He didn't move. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a small, elegant envelope. I slid it across the table toward him. This is the name and address of my new apartment, and my new phone number. It is not for you, or for Tiffany. It is for Aiden and Chloe. I turned my attention to my grandchildren for the first time. Their faces were pale and confused. Aiden. Chloe. Your relationship with me is your own to decide. It is separate from all of this. If you ever want to know your grandmother, the real person, not the bank account, you can call me. The door is always open to you. But it is a choice you will have to make for yourselves, without your parents' influence. Aiden just stared, his mouth a thin line. But Chloe, for a single, fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a hint of sorrow, perhaps even understanding. It was a tiny seed of hope, but I refused to let myself nurture it. It was her choice, not my project. Let's go. Tiffany ordered again, pulling on Mark's arm. This time he seemed to break from his trance. He stood up woodenly, his chair scraping the floor. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. He stared at a point over my shoulder, his face a mask of shame and fury. He had been publicly unmasked. His greed and disrespect laid bare for his own children to see. They turned and walked away, Tiffany marching ahead, her back ramrod straight. Mark followed like a man being led to the gallows. Aiden trailed behind him, his head down. Chloe was the last to leave. She paused for a second at the edge of the table, and her eyes met mine. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, shook her head, and hurried after her family. I was left alone at the table with the spectacular view and 4 half-empty coffee cups. The silence they left behind was vast and clean. I felt a profound sense of release, as if a fever had finally broken. The waiter, a kind-eyed young man, approached my table cautiously. Is everything all right, madam? He asked. I looked up at him and gave him a genuine, unburdened smile. Everything is perfect, I said. May I have the check, please? I paid the exorbitant bill in cash, leaving a generous tip. As I walked out of the restaurant and into the cool Portland night, I felt 10 pounds lighter. The air had never smelled so sweet. The city had never looked so beautiful. The next day, I received the phone call I had been expecting. It was Mark. His voice was not angry this time. It was a strange, hollowed-out version of itself. "I don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "Mom, why would you do this to us? We're your family." "You stopped being my family when you decided I was an obstacle, Mark," I said, my voice gentle but firm. There was no need for anger anymore. The deed was done. A family is built on love and respect. We haven't had that for a very long time. But the money, my kids, Tiffany and we're in trouble. Mom. The admission was a raw, desperate whisper. We have debts. The mortgage, the car payments. We were counting on. We always assumed. You assumed. I finished for him. You assumed you were entitled to the fruits of my life and your father's life without ever tending the garden. You took my love for granted. And you took my resources for granted. The assumptions have ended. Mark, you are a grown man. You have a job. It's time you learn to live within your means. I did. So that's it? You're just cutting us off? Forever? I am starting a new life, I said. One based on honesty and mutual respect. The life I lead now has no room for the kind of relationship we had. I told your children the door is open for them, if they choose. That's the best I can do. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, the sound ragged and uneven. I could hear the shattering of his world. I love you, Mark, I said. And it was true. I would always love the little boy he once was. But I love myself more. I have to. Goodbye. I hung up the phone before he could reply. I knew there would be more calls. There would be pleading, anger, bargaining. There might even be lawyers. But Arthur had assured me everything was ironclad. They had no legal standing. All they had was the gaping hole where their entitlement used to be. I blocked his number. I blocked Tiffany's. I left the line open for my grandchildren. Then I went for a walk. I had no particular destination in mind. I just walked, breathing in my freedom. For the first time, my future was not a countdown to an ending, but the beginning of an entirely new story. A story I would write myself. The weeks following what I came to think of as the Emancipation Dinner were a quiet revolution. The predicted storm from Mark and Tiffany arrived, but it broke against the calm, unbreachable walls I had built around my new life. There were angry voicemails, left on my old, disconnected number. There were tearful, manipulative emails that my new spam filter caught with satisfying efficiency. Arthur even received a blustering letter from a lawyer they had scraped together enough money to hire. A letter which he told me was more theatrical than legal, and which he answered with a single, concise letter of his own, shutting down any possibility of a challenge. The noise of their desperation was a distant echo from a world I no longer inhabited. My world was now one of quiet purpose. I had a foundation to build. Arthur connected me with a small team of professionals, a sharp young woman who would act as the executive director, and a seasoned financial advisor to manage the trust's investments. We held our first board meetings in Arthur's stately conference room. I was no longer Eleanor Vance, the lonely widow. I was Eleanor Vance, the founder and chairwoman. I listened as the director, a woman named Clara, presented proposals for our first grants. A mobile library to bring books to children in low-income neighborhoods. A sponsorship for the Youth Symphony's spring concert. A significant donation to a local no-kill animal shelter that would allow them to expand their facilities. Each proposal, each discussion, filled a space inside me I didn't know was empty. The money, which had once been a secret burden and a source of conflict, was now being transformed into tangible good. It was creating joy, opportunity, and safety. It was the exact opposite of what Mark and Tiffany had wanted it for. It wasn't being hoarded to project an image of success. It was being given away to create real success for others. My personal life also began to blossom in unexpected ways. I found a lovely, light-filled two-bedroom apartment in a completely different part of Portland, A neighborhood with a lively community feel, full of independent bookstores, small cafes, and a year-round farmer's market. It was smaller than my old house, but it felt more spacious. It was filled not with ghosts, but with possibilities. I unpacked my boxes of treasured memories, the photos, Richard's letters, my favorite books, and arranged them not as a shrine to the past, but as the foundation of my present. I joined a book club at the local library. I started taking a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to do. My hands, once stained with the soil of Richard's rose garden, were now stained with the clay of my own creations. I made lopsided bowls and crooked mugs, and I laughed with the other students, women my age who were full of stories in life. I met a woman named Sarah in that pottery class, a retired teacher with a wicked sense of humor and a passion for hiking. We became fast friends. We took walks in Forest Park, had long lunches where we talked about everything and nothing, and went to the symphony together, using the tickets the foundation now sponsored. My life was full. It was busy and vibrant and real. I was no longer lonely. I had friends. I had a purpose. I was building a new family, one based on shared interests and mutual respect, not on obligation and entitlement. One afternoon, about 3 months after the dinner, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some instinct made me answer. Hello? There was a hesitant silence on the other end. Then, a small voice. Grandma? My heart stopped. It was Chloe. Chloe, darling, I said, trying to keep my voice even. It's so good to hear from you. I'm sorry to bother you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I used the card you gave me. I'm at the library near my school. Mom and Dad don't know I'm calling. It's never a bother. Sweetheart, is everything all right? I heard her take a shaky breath. No, not really. Everything is bad. Mom cries all the time. Dad is always angry. They fight about money. He lost his job. My heart ached for the girl, caught in the fallout of her parents' choices. Oh, Chloe, I'm so sorry to hear that. They had to sell the house. She continued, the words tumbling out now. We're moving into a small apartment. They took me out of my school. Aiden is. He's really mad. He blames you for everything. And you, Chloe? I asked gently. Do you blame me? There was a long pause. I could hear her thinking. Struggling. I don't know. She finally said. Her honesty a small, bright light. I was angry at first, but I keep thinking about that night. At the restaurant. What you said. About the box. I remember that day. I knew it was mean. I saw your face when you opened it. Her voice cracked. I'm sorry. Grandma. We were awful to you. The apology was a balm on a wound I didn't even realize was still tender. Thank you for saying that. Chloe. That means more to me than you know. I wanted to know if your offer was real. She whispered. About the door being open. Of course. It's real. I said, my voice thick with emotion. It's always open for you. Always. That phone call was the beginning of a fragile, tentative new relationship. We started slowly. We would meet for hot chocolate after school once a week. I never asked about her parents, and she rarely volunteered information. We talked about her new school, her friends, the books she was reading. I told her about my pottery class, about the foundation, about Sarah. I was careful not to try and buy her affection. I didn't shower her with gifts or money. The only thing I gave her was my time and my full, undivided attention. I learned that beneath the sullen teenage exterior was a bright, thoughtful, and sensitive girl. She was a talented artist. Her sketchbook filled with drawings that were far better than my lopsided pots. I took her to the art museum, and her eyes lit up in a way I'd never seen before. She had a thirst for knowledge and beauty that her parents had never thought to nurture. One day, she asked me about Grandpa Richard. I told her stories about him, his quiet intelligence, his love for books and art, his funny habit of humming off-key when he was concentrating. I showed her photos. As I spoke, I realized I was giving her the one part of her inheritance her parents had almost destroyed: her history, her connection to a legacy of love and integrity, not just money. Her parents, predictably, were not happy about our meetings. Mark left me a single, furious voicemail on Chloe's phone, which she let me listen to. He accused me of trying to poison his daughter against him. He sounded like a desperate, cornered animal. I told Chloe that if it was making her life too difficult, we could stop. She was the one who insisted on continuing. "I need this, Grandma," she said, her eyes pleading. "Please." Our relationship was a secret garden we tended together, a small pocket of peace in the turmoil of her life. It wasn't perfect. It was complicated, but it was real. As the holidays approached, the final pieces of my old life were put to rest. The old house had its new family. The foundation had distributed its first round of grants. I was settled. I was happy. I was at peace. And then came the final, unavoidable confrontation. It happened 2 weeks before Christmas. I was having coffee with Chloe at our usual spot when Mark and Tiffany walked in. It wasn't a coincidence. They had followed her. They stopped at our table, their faces a mixture of fury and desperation. Tiffany looked haggard, the expensive clothes replaced by a worn-out anxiety. Mark had lost weight, and his eyes were shadowed with a despair that was painful to see. "So this is what you've been doing," Mark said, his voice low and trembling with rage. "Meeting our daughter behind our backs, turning her against us." "Hello, Mark." "Tiffany," I said calmly, placing my hand on Chloe's. She was trembling. "Chloe and I have a relationship. It has nothing to do with you." "Everything has to do with us," Tiffany shrieked, drawing stares from around the cafe. "You ruined us. You destroyed our lives. All because of a stupid joke." "It was not a joke, Tiffany. It was the truth," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "And I did not ruin you. Your greed, your entitlement, and your shocking lack of character ruined you. I simply removed the safety net you thought you were entitled to." Mark's face crumpled. The anger seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a raw, pathetic plea. "Mom, please," he begged, his voice breaking. "We're losing everything. Chloe is all we have left. Don't take her from us too." And in that moment, looking at my son's broken face, I felt not triumph, but a deep, profound sorrow. This was the true cost of their choices. This utter devastation. This was the bottom of the empty box. Seeing my son standing there, stripped of his pride, his anger, his entire identity, was the final test of my resolve. The maternal instinct, the one I had suppressed for months, surged forward. It was a physical pull, a deep, primal urge to reach out, to soothe his pain, to tell him it would all be okay. For a terrifying second, I almost yielded. I almost said the words that would undo everything. "I'll help you." But then I looked down at Chloe's hand, which was gripping mine with a desperate strength. I saw the fear in her eyes, not fear of her parents, but fear that I would abandon her, that I would be drawn back into their toxic orbit and leave her behind. I looked back at Mark, at his brokenness, and I saw with a terrible clarity that helping him now wouldn't save him. It would only enable him. It would teach him that consequences were temporary, that a well-timed plea could erase a lifetime of disrespect. It would teach Chloe that my love was conditional, that my principles were for sale. I took a deep breath and held my ground. The old Eleanor would have crumbled. The new Eleanor held fast. "I am not taking Chloe from you, Mark," I said, my voice gentle but firm. For Chloe's sake. I am simply giving her a safe place to land. A place where she is seen and heard for who she is, not for what she represents. She came to me. I did not seek her out. You drove her to this, Tiffany accused, her voice sharp and brittle. If you had just been a normal mother, a normal grandmother, none of this would have happened. You should have just given us our inheritance. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement of her words, even now, was breathtaking. She still didn't get it. She never would. She saw the world only through the lens of what she was owed. Your inheritance? I repeated softly. It was never yours. And a normal grandmother is not an ATM. A normal grandmother deserves respect. She deserves a phone call that isn't about money. She deserves to be seen as a human being. You both failed at that. Spectacularly. I turned my focus back to Mark. Your life is in pieces because of the choices you made. You chose to live beyond your means. You chose to build a life on the assumption of a future you hadn't earned. You chose to treat your own mother with contempt. These are the consequences. They are heavy. I know. But they are yours to bear. I cannot carry them for you. I stood up, pulling a trembling Chloe with me. We're leaving. It is not fair to Chloe to subject her to this. This is between you and me. Mark, do not use your daughter as a pawn in a game you have already lost. So that's it? He asked, his voice hollow. You're just walking away? I looked at my son, the man who was a stranger to me, and I felt a wave of pity so profound it almost choked me. Not pity that would make me save him, but pity for the smallness of his soul. He had traded love for the prospect of money, and now he had neither. I walked away a long time ago. Mark, I said. You just didn't notice until the money was gone. I squeezed Chloe's hand and led her out of the cafe, leaving Mark and Tiffany standing amidst the smell of coffee and the wreckage of their lives. We didn't speak as we walked to my car. I could feel the tremors running through her small frame. Once we were inside, the dam broke. She dissolved into silent, racking sobs, her face buried in her hands. I didn't say anything. I just reached over and pulled her into a hug. I held her as she cried, her tears soaking the shoulder of my coat. She cried for her broken family, for her lost childhood, for the impossible position she had been put in. I held her, and my heart broke for her. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had done the right thing. Saving her meant letting them fall. When her sobs finally subsided, she pulled away, her face blotchy and tear-stained. Are they going to be okay? She whispered. I chose my words carefully. I don't know, sweetheart. I said honestly. They have a very difficult road ahead of them. They have to learn to stand on their own 2 feet. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. But their future is up to them now. Just like your future is up to you. That day marked a turning point for Chloe. The confrontation, as awful as it was, seemed to solidify something inside her. She stopped being a victim of her parents' drama and started to become the architect of her own life. She focused on her schoolwork and her art. She made new friends. Our weekly meetings became a cornerstone of her life, a space of stability and unconditional support. Meanwhile, the Richard and Eleanor Vance Foundation flourished. Our work became known in the city. I attended charity events, not as a wealthy donor seeking recognition, but as an active participant, genuinely invested in the outcomes. I would sit in the audience at the Youth Symphony, watching the young musicians play with a passion that filled my heart. Knowing my foundation helped buy the instruments for some of them, I visited the animal shelter and saw the new wing being built, a safe haven for creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. This was Richard's legacy. It was my legacy. It was real and tangible and good. My life settled into a new, happy rhythm. My friendship with Sarah deepened. We traveled together, taking a trip to the Oregon coast. We stayed in a charming little bed and breakfast, not far from where my old beach house stood. One afternoon, we walked along the beach, and I saw it in the distance. A new family was on the porch, their laughter carrying on the salty wind. A young boy, about the age Mark had been when we first came here, was flying a kite. There was no pain, no regret, just a quiet sense of rightness. The house was alive with joy again. I didn't hear from Mark or Tiffany directly. The silence was a gift. I heard snippets of news through Chloe. They had moved into a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town. Tiffany had gotten a job as a receptionist at a dental office. Mark was still unemployed, his pride making it difficult for him to accept a job he felt was beneath him. Their lives had shrunk, reduced to the size of their actual income, and they were suffocating. It was a sad story, but it was their story, not mine. I had to keep reminding myself of that. As my 69th birthday approached, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known for years. I decided I wanted to spend it quietly. Sarah and I planned to have a simple dinner at my apartment. Chloe was going to come over afterward for cake. The day before my birthday, a small package arrived for me. It was from Chloe. I opened it carefully. Inside was a framed charcoal drawing. It was a portrait of me. She had captured me perfectly, not as an old woman, but as the person I had become. There was a strength in the eyes, a hint of a smile on the lips, a look of serene contentment. It was the most beautiful gift I had ever received. Tucked in the back of the frame was a note, written in her elegant script. Dear Grandma. It read, I used to think that a person's worth was measured by the things they had. You taught me that it's measured by the love they give and the good they do. You are the richest person I know. Happy birthday. I love you. Chloe. The tears that came were tears of pure joy. This was it. This was the validation I had craved for so long. Not from my son, but from his daughter. She understood. She saw me. The next evening, my birthday, was perfect. Sarah and I cooked dinner together, laughing and talking. The doorbell rang just as we were finishing our meal. I opened it, expecting Chloe. But it wasn't Chloe. It was Mark. He stood alone on my doorstep, looking older and more tired than I had ever seen him. He was holding a single, scraggly rose in a plastic sleeve. He looked terrified, like a boy who had been sent to the principal's office. Mom, he said, his voice hoarse. Can I talk to you? Just for a minute? My first instinct was to close the door. My peaceful, happy evening was suddenly under threat. The fortress I had built around my heart instinctively raised its drawbridge. Sarah peered behind me, her expression concerned. Eleanor, is everything all right? I looked at Mark, standing on my welcome mat like a ghost from a past life. He wasn't the arrogant man from the restaurant or the angry man from the cafe. He was just diminished. The fight had gone out of him, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell. He flinched when he saw Sarah, as if he just realized he was intruding. I'm sorry, he mumbled, looking down at the pathetic rose in his hand. This is a bad time. I shouldn't have come. He started to turn away. Wait, I said, the word leaving my lips before I had consciously decided to say it. Something in his defeated posture broke through my defenses. It wasn't pity. Not this time. It was a flicker of something else. Something more complex. I looked at Sarah. It's my son, I said quietly. She nodded, her eyes full of understanding. I'll clean up, she said, giving my arm a supportive squeeze before disappearing back into the kitchen. Her presence, her quiet support, gave me strength. I stepped out into the hallway, closing the apartment door behind me. I didn't want him inside my new life. Not yet. Maybe not ever. We stood under the cool, fluorescent light of the apartment building corridor. What do you want, Mark? I asked, my voice not unkind, but not warm either. It was neutral. He held out the rose. "Happy birthday," he said. The flower was bruised. Probably the last one left at the corner store. It was a miserable offering. But it was an offering nonetheless. I didn't take it. He let his hand drop. "I'm not here to ask for money," he said quickly, as if he needed to get that out of the way. "I know that's over. I've been doing a lot of thinking." He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine shame in his eyes. "You were right," he said, his voice cracking. "About everything. I've been a fool. A greedy, arrogant fool. I took you for granted. I took everything for granted. I taught my son to be just like me, and now he barely speaks to me. I drove my wife to be who she is. I destroyed it all." He took a ragged breath. "I lost my job because my performance had been terrible for months. I wasn't focused on work. I was focused on planning what I was going to do with your money. My whole life was built on a fantasy, on an inheritance I hadn't earned and didn't deserve." He wasn't making excuses. He was confessing. It was the most honest I had ever heard him be. "The box," he whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "God, the box. I thought it was so clever. So funny. It was the cruelest thing I've ever done. And I can't take it back." He looked at me, his face a mask of misery. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." The apology, when it finally came, was not what I had expected. It wasn't a key to unlock forgiveness. It wasn't a magic wand to heal the past. It was just a sad, broken sound in a quiet hallway. I thought of the years of hurt, the casual dismissals, the crushing weight of their indifference. One apology couldn't erase that. It couldn't unbreak my heart. But it was a start. "I hear you, Mark," I said softly. And I did. I heard his pain, his regret. I heard the depth of the hole he had dug for himself. I started seeing a therapist," he said, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand, "trying to figure out why I am the way I am. And I've been looking for work. Any work. A friend of a friend got me an interview for a sales job at a hardware store. It's a huge step down. Tiffany hates it." "What Tiffany thinks is no longer my concern," I said. "What do you think?" He looked down at his hands. "I think it's a start. It's real. It's a paycheck I'll earn myself." He looked up again. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. And I don't expect anything from you. I wanted you to know. And I wanted to say I'm sorry. And happy birthday." The doorbell to my apartment buzzed. It was Chloe. Right on time. Mark flinched at the sound. "That'll be Chloe," he said. "I should go." "Mark," I said. And he stopped. "The road back is a long one. And I don't know where it leads. I have a new life now. A life that I love. I will not give it up." "I know," he said. "I don't expect you to." "But," I continued, choosing my words with the utmost care, "what you do from here, the choices you make for yourself, that matters. Rebuilding your life, honestly and humbly, that matters." I was not offering him a relationship. I was offering him a sliver of grace. Acknowledgement that his effort, if it was real, was not invisible. The door opened and Chloe stood there, a cake box in her hands. She stopped short when she saw her father, her face clouded with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Dad? What are you doing here?" Mark looked at his daughter, and his expression was one of pure anguish. "I came to wish your grandmother a happy birthday," he said quietly. He looked from her to me, then back again. I'll let you go." He turned and walked down the hallway toward the elevators without looking back, the sad rose still clutched in his hand. Chloe and I watched him go. Then she looked at me, her eyes full of questions. Is he okay? I don't know, I said, putting my arm around her shoulder and guiding her into the apartment. But for the first time in a very long time, he might be. We didn't speak of it again that night. We ate cake with Sarah. We laughed. We celebrated my birthday, my life. But the encounter lingered in the air. It wasn't a return to the past, but it had changed the future. The hard, clean line I had drawn had been smudged. In the months that followed, I did not see Mark, but I heard about him from Chloe. He took the job at the hardware store. He came home tired and sore. But he came home. He and Tiffany fought constantly. Their marriage, built on the flimsy foundation of financial aspiration, couldn't withstand the weight of reality. Eventually, they separated. Tiffany moved out, seeking a life with someone who could provide the lifestyle she felt she deserved. Mark was left alone in a small apartment with his son, Aiden, who was still angry and resentful. But Mark, according to Chloe, didn't give up. He kept going to his job. He kept going to therapy. He started trying, clumsily, to reconnect with Aiden. Not with money, but with time. They started shooting hoops at the park on weekends. It was awkward and difficult, but it was happening. He never called me. He never asked for anything. He seemed to understand that his healing was his own responsibility. 1 year after he first showed up on my doorstep, on my 70th birthday, another flower arrived. This time it wasn't a single, sad rose. It was a small, simple pot of primroses, delivered from a local nursery. The card had only 5 words, written in his familiar scrawl. Just because. Happy birthday, Mark. I placed the pot on my windowsill, where it would get the morning sun. It wasn't a key to my heart or a pass to re-enter my life. It was just a pot of flowers. A quiet acknowledgement. A sign that, somewhere in the wreckage he had made, a small, new thing was trying to grow. My life continued to be full and happy. The foundation thrived. My friendship with Sarah was a constant joy. My bond with Chloe was the greatest gift of my later years. She was accepted into a prestigious art program, her tuition assisted by a scholarship from an anonymous donor grant I had arranged through the foundation without her knowledge. I don't know if my family will ever be whole again in the traditional sense. I don't know if Mark and I will ever sit down to dinner together. Some things, once broken, can never be perfectly mended. The scars remain. But I learned that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a future that is stronger and more beautiful than the one that was taken from you. They thought I was an empty box. They were wrong. My life wasn't empty. It was just waiting to be filled. And now, it is overflowing. Not with the things money can buy, but with purpose, with laughter, with friendship, and with a quiet, resilient love. I am not a woman defined by what I lost. I am a woman defined by what I chose to build in its place. And it is a magnificent structure.